Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Yep, okay. Well, first off, obviously, I don't know you, you don't know me. And that is a real problem when trying to speak with an audience, because I can assure you, in my world, over the last 4 Olympic cycles, just dealing with high-performance sport. Is this working? I think it's only when my head's in a certain angle. Let's talk like this. It takes me and the coaches I work with anywhere between 6 months to 3 years to build the level of trust that we need to be able to have a true open conversation where I can sit across the table from this young lady, say she's a national team coach, and call a spade without having any sort of personal attack seem to be in that. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? So with my talk to you today, you've got to give me that trust, because I'm going to come at you very hard, very hard. I don't make a living from this type of presentation. It is not my job. I sit in an ivory tower, or I used to, for Olympic cycles with Canada's Winter Olympic sports, waiting for 19 to 23-year-olds who are capable of challenging the world in the Winter Olympic sports to represent Canada. Okay? And 5 years into that process, it was very clear to me that Canada didn't have very good 19 to 23-year-olds. They weren't very good athletes, and they weren't particularly good at so-called the sports that they've been doing for over 10 to 15 years. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Okay. So at that time, so this was in the 90s, I got interested in trying to look at the process by which children and youth in Canada were developed. Now, I had a very rich and very good schooling in the United Kingdom. I'm from London originally. Okay? Did my undergraduate there, which meant I got exposed very clearly to some of the world's greatest sports systems through the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. The great literature, even though we are very disparaging about it, around high-performance programs, much of it from the former Eastern Bloc, which of course is tainted by the whole drug aspect, but what they did with children, not necessarily so. They understood what they were doing. That's not to say there weren't programs that were somewhat dubious. I'm not saying that. But there is a vast amount of literature. The greatest book, if you ever get your hands on it, is Haray's book from the 1970s on track and field and development in the former East Germany. If you actually read it, it's long-term athlete development in disguise. There are actually 10 stages that he describes. And you know, of the stages that he's actually talking about, every one of them mentions education of the athlete, appropriate to the age of the youngster going through the system always. They recognize this. The next thing is I get fed up. I've got a bunch of letters after my name, but I get fed up, for the most part, of people that want to get into turf war or can't leave their egos behind when it comes to doing the best thing for children. You know what the biggest problem on the planet is when it comes to our children and youth? It's us, the adults, screwing it up for them. They are not miniature adults, and we have to understand that how much more evidence do we need to understand growth and development through the first 2 decades of life? We know at least 95% of what there is to know in general. We don't know everything about brain development yet, but from a physical structure point of view, we've got a very clear idea. We don't know every nuance of skill acquisition yet, but we know a great deal. We don't know everything about tactical acceptance and teaching of systems yet, but we know a great deal. So here's the challenge for us. If you wait for 100% accuracy in evidence, you are doomed to a number of things. One, you are doomed to follow the world's best, because people will not wait for all the information before they actually implement stuff. And I can assure you, when I started on this journey over 20 years ago in thinking about this, and I'm not alone, loads of great people, the 3-year-old who was then 20 years ago is now 23, and we missed that kid. They're gone. So every year that we adults are allowed to pass before we act to do the right thing for children in an age group sport, recreation, and physical activity, we lose a generation. And that is our fault. That is the damning indictment for us as adults. So I don't care whether you use the terminology I'm going to describe that Canada has adopted, to where that came from. I don't care whether you have a system that's called level 1 through level 10, or red, green, blue, or Venus, Mars, Jupiter. It doesn't matter. Why is it we accept, for example, in the phenomenal activity of judo, everyone starts with a white belt, and eventually, if you show the competency, you get to a black belt, and even then it's not over, because then you can get red little dashes on your belt that signify different dans. We understand that. You go to school from grade 1 to grade 12. You do music from grade 1 to grade 8. So why is it in sport and recreation we screw it up so badly? So this is the journey we're going to go on today. Sure.
Because it needs a collar. He likes you. Try.
Hello. Is that better? Okay. So, my job really, I don't expect you to agree with everything I say, but my job is to throw that rock in the pond and cause some ripples to make you think. Okay? What works in Canada cannot necessarily be parachuted into Singapore. But children are the same, roughly speaking, across the planet in terms of the evolutionary path they go through. There may be a different chronology to that, but the reality is we're all the same. You understand what I'm saying? Yes? Okay. Is this working for me?
No collar. This will be better?
I'm going to give this back to you. Hang on to them. I hate these. I do. As you can tell, I like doing this sort of stuff. Okay, here we go. So, throw the rock. Next thing is, I expect you to have more questions after this than you've had answers, because I don't expect to give you answers. I expect to make you think and ask you to ask questions about what you're doing around the key areas. That's the point of this, to share that kind of information. I'm interested in this quote. Dr. Colin Higgs is an eminent academic and practitioner in Canada and has been very influential on me. And so he said, I'm not interested in being right, but I am interested in getting it right. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not against egos. I've got one. Everyone else probably has as well. But I think there's a time and a place when that ego needs to come into play, and another time when you have to accept perhaps different information. We've all got biases. You all came into this room having expectation. Even those 4 little letters, LTAD, across the planet, can make people very angry. And yet other people will hold it up as the best things that's happened to children in 2 decades. Actually, I don't care what you think of it. I'm going to talk to you about what it means underneath it. Here's one thing that every one of us in this room needs to understand. We had a 1 in 400 trillion chance of being born. Every one of us, we share that. So here's the challenge that I'm throwing down to you is, what the hell are you going to do with that chance that you have? And we're still, none of us in this room are spring chickens. Clock is ticking away for us. This journey of life. And you'll notice as we go from the crawling baby through to the older adult, that there's change. One of these things should scream at you is that children are not miniature adults. They're different. You'll notice for a start, although it's not necessarily well shown in this diagram, that the heads of children and infants and even youth are larger in proportion to their bodies than when they are full adults. That signifies a number of different developmental aspects going on with the brain, the most highly trainable organ of the body, something we seem to forget about. In Canada last year, Health Canada stated that the average expectancy of life for a male was 80 years and for a female 84. Now, I don't know exactly what the same correlates for Singapore are, but they're not going to be that different. You live in a relatively healthy society. You have an economic wealth, particularly considering the surrounding regions for you, that allows you to have a quality of life beyond other areas. So your life expectancy is likely to be relatively high. You have pretty good nutrition compared to other parts. And until recently, you were relatively active. But that is being challenged, of course. And remember, the things that will kill us, increasingly our females, but certainly over the last 30 years, the males before the age of 60, are largely to do with what we eat and what we don't do. So the type of things we put in our mouths and the fact that we don't exercise or do physical work as we used to. These are the things that contribute to us on any multiple regression that kill us before our time. Pretty clear. If you transfer that to days, it means the guys have around 29,000 days and the girls have 30,000 days on the planet. Then we go through childhood. The first 12 years, 4,382.1 days to do the right thing or expose those children to as many different experiences as possible to develop that brain. To produce the capability of that brain through its internet in the body, aka the nervous system, to actually move and deal with all the challenges thrown at it. And remember, childhood is about getting ready to then be an adolescent. And an adolescent is about getting ready to be a young adult. And a young adult is about getting ready to be an adult. Just in the same way as sport. Your first swimming lessons prepare you to get ready for the next execution level, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And if you're lucky and one of the few and you have the attitude, determination, and capability, perhaps you might represent your region of the world at some international event. But there are no foregone conclusions on that. We move then through adolescence and into young adulthood, a period depending on when you start, and in this case 14 years of age, about 5,110 days on the planet, through to around 18 at 6,570, a period of about 1,400 days. A period of massive change, and yet often we're making huge decisions as adults for these youth at this particular time. We're making decisions around their lives, and I will tell you this, it's their lives, not ours. There were some great presentations earlier. We learned about everything from transformational coaching. We had excellent discussion on generational theory, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We're not actually dealing, and there's no slur on the previous presenter, with Generation Y. They're more likely to be our parents currently, if you look at their date of birth. We're already past the Generation Z, actually, even though they're deeply in your systems. And we're well into Generation Alpha, the kids born after 2010. And remember, these generational theories aren't necessarily transferable across the planet. They give us some ideas. South Africa has a completely different generation they're dealing with at the moment. Those are the post-apartheid children. If you look at China, just up the road from us, after the pivotal elections of the late 1980s, that generation, looking at hope to the future. So these generational components, the environment, which came through from two of the previous three speakers very clearly about how important environmental context is and why we shouldn't latch on to simply teaching our teachers and coaches around boring, staid, narrow, classic aspects of instruction. You heard it very clearly from all three previous presenters about teaching our coaches about relationships, which means that your coach education very clearly needs to be about who coaches whom at a particular age. In other words, I want to be one of the world's best coaches of 6 to 9-year-olds. I can be a world-leading coach of that age group. I can be a world-leading coach of adolescents, as opposed to most coaching courses, which you go do and you do some kind of level 1 and level 2 and level 3, and it's generic, and it doesn't matter whether you're going to coach girls, boys, ladies, men, kids going through adolescence or whatever. That is a misnomer. You need to really think about coaching people to whom their target audience actually is, what kind of skill sets are required. Because you could have a national team coach dealing with 25-year-olds to 30-year-olds who would be completely inept at coaching a beginner at 5 through to 6 and 7. And yet here's the irony of most coach education systems and most coach professional systems. We often put, but not always, our most precious resource, our 5-year-olds to our 14-year-olds in the hands of the least qualified, least experienced, and least paid, if at all, people. This is classically the model in Canada, where the vast majority of our age group coaches, of course, are parent volunteers. Now, we can't rush to an economic model because we'd probably price out most kids from actually going into sport if we suddenly put professional coaches in every position. So how do you solve that problem? But there's strength in numbers. So perhaps you can spread the cost over a whole area of a small charge, which would allow for one person to be a technical director of those volunteers. Teach them how, constantly keep on top of them. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm trying to get some serious messages. So we can talk about athlete development all we like, but who delivers it? That happens, one, in the community, not at the national sport level, and two, it's delivered by the hands-on coaches and instructors, whomever they may be. So we have to educate those people. That's where the money should be spent, and the effort. One of the goals for me is to make sure that by the time kids finish high school, or whatever you like to call it here, 18 years of age, we have at least tried to help children become active, skilled, imaginative, resourceful, and resilient. We've done our job. And they should be able to look back on their age group sport and say this to you: if we've done our job as adults, you know what? I learned a lot, and I had a great time, regardless of the performance level. Regardless of the performance level. I don't care whether they're en route to the Olympics or they're just going to move into some recreational pursuit of the future. We've done our job at that level. Because I can assure you this, and it doesn't matter who you read, and that's why it's a broad statistic. Regardless of the sport, regardless of the gender, 85 to 96% of the age group champions are not the people that win at the senior level. Troy, in his excellent presentation, track and field, the conversion from world junior medalists to the senior level is in the order of 3 to 4%. And that's in a relatively late junior category, 19 years and below. 3 to 4%. That's why, and I don't apologize for my language, I don't give a shit who wins at 10, 12, 14, 16 years of age. Outside of female artistic and gymnastic sports, there's no predictability in that. I hope to God they're enjoying it and having fun and not being given adult short-term values in winning being important. And the research, actually, some of the research that's talked about, it was mentioned about changing the game. Well, much of the changing the game statistics came out of 3 studies done over the last 20 years on team sports. Yes, children would far rather play on a losing team than sit on the bench of a winning team. They value fun. The reason why they drop out is not having fun. And although we hold up the banner of exemplary coaching and good role models in coaching of keeping in sport, the number one reason clearly over the last 5 years for children dropping out of sport is having a poor relationship with their instructor and coach. That rests on us as the adults. And then we have adults. This is me, and I'm driving a message with you. According to Health Canada, I've got 24 years left, okay? 24 years left. That's around 8,760 days. The only problem is I don't have 8,700 days because I'm asleep for 2,900 of them. I'm sitting on the toilet for 110 of them. So I don't have all that time. So when I started looking at this subject, I made an oath to myself that I was going to try and have some impact, which is why I flew 24 hours to have a chat with you. Really. Because I think it's important. And yes, you may say, well, that's very egotistical of you, Steve. That's big-headed. But the problem is I'm frustrated because we're stopping ourselves from taking the knowledge that we actually have and sitting down with a blank piece of paper, using that knowledge and designing something that would be the best possible effort, at least right now, for these children and youth. And that doesn't mean to say it's perfect, but it's going to be a darn sight better than what we're doing right now. I don't know how old we are all in this room, but I can assure you there's over 1,000 years of experience in sport in this room. 1,000 years. There's 260 people here. We should be able to solve any challenge when it comes to child and youth sport and recreation, any of them. And we hold ourselves back often because people argue about terminology. People have big debates on physical literacy. I hate it with a vengeance. And I remind us that with every year of inactivity by us, or keeping to the status quo, we don't do the best job for those children. And remember, they're 10 once, 12 once, 14 once in their lives. Could argue that we're all unethical in our behavior. This graphic, I'll send it to you actually. This is actually from Australia, talking about X, Y, and Zs, and some interesting things. We talk about the rapidity. One of the things that really is, as was talked about Coach Troy earlier, is this aspect of technology for us. We've got a generation, if you look at the Generation Zers, that were 2 years of age in 1997 when Google came. 2 years. And they've lived through absolutely everything, including 2010, the introduction of the iPad, which is also the start of the Generation Alphas. They've grown up in a different age. It is no wonder that the Generation Z at the moment are resistive to buying houses or big expensive components, or don't save that much. They've grown up in the biggest recession economically of the last 50 years, 2007 through 2010. They have a different outlook on life. The messages that you should have heard when you listened to Coach Troy speak was that you need to become in tune with whatever age group you're dealing with and understand what makes them tick. Comes back to how we educate our coaches and instructors and what we do in phys ed schools and coaching courses in Singapore. So let's talk about Canada. A lot of stuff touted about it because Canada has almost made a bit of a business of exporting, and I'll reduce it to these 4 letters, but I do not want to devalue the process, to LTAD, which has become synonymous with one particular terminology. But long-term athlete development, and that's the way we should talk about it, as a process, not just as one thing owned by one particular consortium, is a long-term process, probably 2.5 decades long, at least. How did that come about? Well, back in 2000, 2003, there was a little bit of a ripple that was actually occurring in Canada around wondering what was going on. We weren't doing very well internationally. We were very stagnant in our sport. We had massive and obviously increasing healthcare challenges, largely around inactivity, poor nutritional decisions, those type of things. And we were listening to the rest of the world talking about their systems, particularly countries like Australia and Germany and the United Kingdom. And a group of 5 of us said enough is enough. And we came from different walks. That Colin Higgs I mentioned, Ishram Bai, who had made a bit of a name describing a 4-stage approach coming from the world largely of alpine skiing and a number of articles he'd published. Descriptive. They weren't sort of a hypothesis presented. It was observational about how do you lay this type of process out. And so a group of us got together and we decided we're going to put our reputations on the line and write a pop science document. No more than that. I'll be very honest. The pop science took massive poetic literature license with what we said. Made some sweeping statements just to try to kick people into action because there was a lot of inertia in the system. And we called that document Canadian Sport for Life. We added a number of different aspects to it. We were very concerned about the first decade of life in children. And particularly the preschool years, 0 to 4 years of age, 0 to 6 even. So we added some extra stages to the original Ishram Bai model. And then because we're Canadian, we're very concerned about the entire population. We recognized that the vast majority of kids that would go through some kind of physical education, games, preparation type program were not going to go and represent Canada. And could we actually impact the whole of Canadian society by having people that were fitter and healthier? So we added Active for Life. That's the story of it. What happened next was that we got some money from one particular facet of the Canadian government. And this is where the mistake started to be happened. We got the money from Sport Canada, which is our global group that looks after sport, recreational and performance sport. And the money was channeled through the 52 representative sports for Canada, the national sport organizations. They all got $75,000 for 2 years to develop their own long-term athlete development pathway, hypothetical. And remember, all it is a framework. It's not a fixed entity. It needs to change over time, and wrapped up in it is the Japanese principle of Kaizen, continual improvement. So whatever we were going to write in 2005, it better be improved by 2010 and 2015 and 2020. Get the idea? It was very inclusionary. We have over 300, 400 academics right now doing various pieces of work to try to contribute. It's an open door policy. What got people's backs up was that we used terminology from sport, because it came from sport. We used things like learn to train, train to train, train to compete, train to win. Well, immediately that turned off a whole faction of people in recreation who didn't give a damn about competitive sport. But understand where it evolved from. But this is part of the challenge, and one of the key things we didn't do at the start was involve the true decision makers. So if you're truly interested in children and youth and building a great population for the future for Singapore, you have to have the triad. The people responsible for health, the people responsible for education, and the people responsible for sport and recreation. If you do not have all those decision makers at the table, forget about any kind of long-term athlete development. You can have a very singular approach to maybe a high-performance stream, as many countries have demonstrated. And remember, if you're actually interested in high-performance sport, at the 75,000-foot level, there are three things actually that dictate international success: population size, money and resources invested in that system, and the social, cultural, political significance of sport in that society. End of story. Now, currently, there are only two countries being chased hard by a third that have all three: United States of America and China. Each have different challenges. They're being chased hard by India. But India has massive challenges too. Wide socioeconomic gaps in its population, a large geographical mass, poor communication. Do you need all three? No, because there are a number of countries that have demonstrated that having at least two, you have a good chance, assuming you have in place some kind of systematic athlete development program, or at least participant development program through the ages. Those would be countries like Australia, population 30 million. Canada, to some extent, 30 million. Even the United Kingdom at twice the population, 60 million. Although I would argue whether or not systematically they have an athlete development pathway. They've done a very good job in several sports. Same as Canada. To think that we in Canada have this systematically embedded? No, because here's the thing. Where did we start? We started with the national sport organizations. And yet where really does long-term athlete development, child development, youth development occur? In the local community. Massively, massively distant from the influence of national sport organizations. Canada's arranged, we have the national, then we have provinces, like states in the United States, and then we come down to the municipalities and the communities. So we have a disconnect from NSO, national organization, down to the community. And I already said, this is where all the children are. So even after, not far off now, 2 decades, not quite, 15 odd years, we haven't even scratched the surface at doing the right thing for our children. We haven't impacted schools. We don't see an increase in the commitment and the philosophy of physical activity and physical education in our schools. It's got worse. School sport, Canada. It's probably one of the most exclusionary practices in North America because it involves so few children compared to the countries of Western Europe, for example, which we should look at. So we have some massive challenges. Oh, let me go back. So 2005, we published the initial document. 2014, we have a second edition, and we're in the process, because of Kaizen, of writing our third version. I wrote an article for the American College of Sport Medicine called LTAD Canada, Attempting System Change. That's about to be revised. It will be out this year, just telling the real truth about the challenges. And I'm going to go through a few of those and those origins that we had. Where does this stuff come from? Now, I mentioned former Eastern Bloc countries, but I can take you back to ancient Rome, ancient Greece, the Egyptians, and show you long-term processes in how they develop people, largely usually with military endeavors. They train kids to get ready for eventual battle as adults. They had their philosophers go through school, all the type of things you'd expect to see. But Viru, very famous sports scientist from Estonia, in 1995 did a review of all the leading programs worldwide, either in individual sport or nations, that actually had some kind of long-term process. And they all had very clear 3 different sequential overlapping processes. They all believe strongly in fundamental preparation in the younger years. A widespread smorgasbord of activity. They then, and this is, it's an English translation of a Russian phrase, maximal realization of performance capacity. In other words, everyone take a Valium. You know what a Valium is? Okay, deal with stress. All the adults take a Valium while the children and youth go through puberty. And you gradually see what comes out at the end of that. You can nurture it along, for sure, but you really don't know what you're going to have until they've gone through it. So you wait to see that happening. And then finally you get into a stage of long-term sport mastery, which is where Istvan Bai, bless his cotton socks, who takes undue criticism, in my mind, because he's passionate and he argues and he'll go toe-to-toe with anyone. No need to criticize him for that. Developed this specifically for sport, and as I mentioned initially, for Canadian alpine skiing. Took a lot of flack. Those terminologies may not be the right ones across all activities, across all social domains. But as I said, I don't care what you call it. Level 1, 2, 3, 4, red, green, blue, black. Name it after the stars, doesn't really matter. You know one of the best Learn to swimming programs on the planet, the Red Cross program? It uses colors. You have the white level and the green and so forth and the red. We get it. So why do we get so upset about what we call something? Why isn't it no one asks us, what are you actually doing in Train to Train? What roughly are the chronological but really biological ages of that age group? Is there a difference between girls and boys? What do they do in the summer months versus the winter months? What do they do in exam periods at school? Because children have lives. Independent of the sport, believe it or not. And stress is stress. Doesn't matter where it comes from. How many of you deliberately make sure that you do not do massive stressful things during exam periods, or worse still, immediately after exams, when the children, from an immunological function point of view, are in the pit of despair? I know many coaches that immediately as soon as school is out, they rush off and do a training camp. High volume, high intensity, just at the time when they're actually screwed. First 2 decades of life, we understand grades. You go to grade 1. It's taught by someone that knows the curriculum that's appropriate for grade 1ers. They use an assessment that's appropriate for grade 1. And because they're little kids, they don't necessarily even go to school for the whole day. Maybe in the afternoon they have a nap and some milk and cookies. And then they go to grade 2. And then 3, and 4, and 5. And no one gets worried too much about the exams, at least in North America, and certainly not in the Scandinavian countries, until about grades 10, 11, 12, when the exams get serious. And exams, after all, are AKA competition. That's all it is, assessment, no different than a race. But school isn't worried about the race at 2, grade 2, or grade 3, or grade 4. And why is it this? So I live in a culture where school is taking on increasing importance, and I know it's the same here. And yet, perennially, year after year, the countries at the top of the academic performance charts are 2 countries that don't give homework, and they don't go to school very much, and they allow their children to play. Norway, Denmark, Finland. Yet our kids, we're killing them. Got to do all this homework. Massive pressure. We have high levels of depression and suicide, and set up all sorts of cultural problems for later in life. Who started that trend? I can assure you it wasn't the kids. Oh, I want more homework, I want more homework. And then you get to this. I don't care who you read, what terminology. In the developmental process of teaching kids things and developing, hopefully, eventually some level of expertise, whatever that level may be, the terminology and the systems you see are very similar. This is why, when I first read the work that came through from Professor Cote, that it resonated so strongly with me. This is a retrospective analysis. This is looking at exactly what happens with youngsters. And it makes such intuitive sense that you saw this model. And Jean did not talk too much about it today because he was talking about his passionate aspect of transformational coaching, but the aspect of entry. Adults making decisions for children to put them into sports, and then hopefully these youngsters sampling lots of different sports. And then gradually, as they become a little bit more self-actualized and decide what they like, they may start investing in things that they like preferentially. And then perhaps, that's why the question mark is there, perhaps they have the drive and attitude and capability to move on to become elite. But there are no guarantees on that. Makes intuitive sense, doesn't it? And it's borne by the literature. And doesn't that resonate with so many other things that we've heard? Of course it does. But we talk ourselves out of this as adults. Oh, no. You've got to have a golf club in your hand at 2. You need 100 hours by the time you're 2.5. And then this is where the Canadian aspect came in. And as I said, we were just a little bit more interested in all Canadians. And I admit it as well, from my perspective, because I, in a very, very harsh way, want to be able to find the few from the many, the few who can represent Canada at the highest level, and have the patience in the system to allow those youngsters to come through. Because at the moment in Canada, I'd often say that many of our finest athletes we never see because they've left sport or they're in the wrong sport. We have a fixation with hockey in our country. So we have, particularly on the male side, so we have lots of, this is ice hockey, so lots of kids start off on this journey in ice hockey and stay and stay and stay because they want to try and live the dream, when perhaps they should have been in equestrian or swimming or something else. But we're never given that opportunity. I'm being facetious there. I don't know that for fact. That's circumspection. But I'll sit in an argument and sit at a table and argue that point with you. So we came up with this. It is just a framework. It shouldn't upset anyone. It's just showing at certain ages and reflecting that chronological age is not necessarily always a good guide. So you'll see some overlap. You'll see differences between males and females. We just have an idea of how to put things together. And it should just probe questions. Well, what do you mean by fundamental movement skills? Why do those need to be done before the age of 12, so to speak? And is that true? Is it a fixed cutoff at 12, or is there a little bit of latitude? Of course there is. Take a Valium. And then we have this type of model overall. And again, it has the classic sort of pyramid to the left, basically just signifying that fewer and fewer are going to reach the level of elite. Just as with anything, I don't care whether you want to be a concert pianist, great mathematician, a physicist, an artist. The very best are a few. It's just like the Olympics itself. There's 3 places on an Olympic podium, not 7 billion. If there were 7 billion, we'd all be standing there. I know that's a harsh social message. We all want to be inclusive. We all want to participate. We want to belong. We all want to medal. But unfortunately, when it gets to being the best at anything, there's very few spots. That's just reflective of anything. How many men have stood on the moon? 11? We haven't all been there. God knows what would happen if we were there. Leave a load of trash. Maybe put it out of orbit, God knows. This is really what we're talking about in the first 2 decades. And remember, even though I might be showing you that it's stopping, it's not stopping. This arrow is signifying it's continuing, including this term, physical literacy. What does that look like for life? What's physically literate mean for an octogenarian, someone in their 80s, compared to someone in their 60s, to 40s, to 20s? So what we're really talking about is make sure everyone starts off as a participant. Hopefully that goes for the rest of their lives, because even the very best in the world retire from high-performance sport. And where do they go? Back to their community. Back to their community. And hopefully they still like their sport and being physically active. They're not so pissed off that they hate it. And that scares me, you know, the number of athletes that have problems with their national sport organization, or don't actually like participating in their sport. And then there are some sports that you can't really do recreationally, like bobsleigh. You don't see people sort of bobsleighing down the street outside here, do you know? They're 40 years of age. You don't see people luging down the road. No. So what are they going to do? Hopefully you've equipped them with tools that they can do other activities. Take up badminton. Whatever it might be. Recreationally competitive. And gradually, as you come through that, maybe there's a group of them that start to think, I really want to do more of this, and get into a performance development stream, and then finally on into high performance. And you should learn to use these terms, elite sport, high performance sport, in a very reserved fashion for what it truly means. Set the value of what that means. Not that I could walk out of here and find a swim program that's high performance for a bunch of 8-year-olds. Because they are so far removed from high performance, it's not funny. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? So who sets that? It's not the children, it's us. And this room, with your experience and your position in this society, has the ability to make those changes. You're the experts. So the dashboard concept. What is on the dashboard for 5 years of age versus the dashboard for 10 versus 15? What is on the dashboard for the coaches and instructors of those age groups? These are the questions we should actually be asking. So what challenges did we face in Canada? We had massive system inertia. Why? Because it was a system, and people don't like change. It's kind of stupid, really. I wake up every morning, I look in the mirror, and I wonder where that young, intelligent, handsome young man went. Change happens. We've talked about the generations. I guarantee we could go back 50 years, and the parents of 50 years ago is saying exactly the same stuff about their kids. There are alternative challenges now. One of the biggest things is the rate of information, the speed of information that the children of today get. That is one fact and one very clear difference. But otherwise, puberty was puberty. That animal that came down the stairs to breakfast every morning, between the ages of 12 through to 16, was a bear back then as a bear back right now. How's your day at school, dear? Go to bed. Get out of bed. Tidy up your bedroom. Nothing's changed from that regard. It's the environment aspect that has changed, and we need to pay attention to that. Massive resentment. Why? Because as I said, we adopted Isfan Bai's terminology. Oh, why did you do that? I've got a better system. I've got a better system. Mine's called this. So we ran into a lot of professional jealousy to a certain extent. I didn't care. I found it all quite amusing, actually. I'll argue with anyone. And downright hostility. Certain sports will come to us and say, well, we're doing a great thing. Oh, really? Well, show us the evidence. That was very easy to do. Oh, well, we're great. Oh, yeah. What are the key performance indicators for you? What really are you using to say that you're great? What are your retention rates? Why have you got a 50% dropout in participation with every age change? Because surely retention. I was very interested in the concept of what is fun. I don't know the answer to it, but one of the very first things I look for is, does a child come back week in, week out by their own volition? That's quite difficult because if the parent's driving them up and dropping them off and you don't know whether it's of their own volition, but I'd certainly be asking them that. Do you really like doing this? Do you want to come back each week? Because that shows you they're invested, because remember, fun is one of the most important motivators going, even for us adults. We had a top-down approach. It was driven by the national teams, national sports, rather. If I was doing this again, I would never do that. Okay? We had real problems that we have not solved. You have to educate parents. It is the lost leader in all of this. Without them, because many are volunteers, whether administratively or technically, they're the people bringing and investing their time and money into the programs. You have to tell them what they're going to do and why. We've done a terrible job of that in Canada at the moment. We still haven't solved that one. And the role of competition. There was some discussion earlier today about that as well. Competition is very important. Don't let anyone tell you against it. But what does competition look like for a 5-year-old versus a 10-year-old versus a 15 versus 20? School gets it. The artistic sports actually get it. The combative sports definitely get it. We all understand scaling. You go to a primary school, and how big is the furniture? We haven't got them sitting in big adult chairs. We've got them in little chairs. You go to the washroom, it's all tiny sinks down here. You go outside and look at the bicycles in the rack. It's not like Greg LeMond's bicycle. It's like little children's bicycles. And yet often in sport, we want to put them on full-scale surfaces or playing areas of adults. Not strictly true. Things are changing. What are the positives? Well, it's definitely become a momentum and movement for change. It's become a little bit of a philosophy. In fact, one thing that happened because the organization, this is Canadian Sport for Life, started to beg for government money, they actually made themselves what became in Canada known structurally as a multi-sport organization. And they did it so that they could access government funding. But with doing that, I would actually argue they lost some of their soul because it no longer became a collective of people all believing in something. It became a structural entity. Now, I hope we solve that, because this is meant to be, we're doing this for the right reasons, not simply chasing money. Do you understand the difference? This is something we believe in because here is the evidence. And this is because we're trying to do the right thing for our children, et cetera, rather than become another government agency. This is why it's important to get all the agencies around the table right at the start. Health, education, sport and recreation. So we have cross-agencies starting to happen, but it's a bit slow. We haven't made a big dent in education, as I said. We've actually had more impact on health and at the community level. We have some level of critical review that's improving. So if the statement is made that's going to have some policy change, there needs to be some evidence to make sure we're investing in the right direction. The sports science stuff, we get people really get head up on whether or not the energy systems, I don't know, the glycolytic system is very important when you're 12 years of age as a female. So we go from the macro level to the micro level. I'm not worried about that. That's small potatoes. We have to make sure we have the global content in place before we really start doing that. And if someone wants to study that off to the side, they can in the meantime. We do strongly believe in continual improvement, and I do think that's one attitude change that for most sports has started to happen. People asking themselves, are we continually improving? The problem with that is governance. Most of our sport agencies they have boards of directors at the local level who are volunteers, often parents with vested interest. So we have some governance issues. And then it has been a spur to research, whether it's people actually interested in with different motivations. Oh, that stuff that Canadian Sport for Life saying, bunch of bull honky, and I'm going to prove them wrong. So I'm going to do some research. Good, knock yourself out. Over here, someone else wants to say, here, let's try and look at physical literacy. What does it mean? Is it relevant to even measure this stuff? I won't get onto that right now. And resources. There are more and more resources. At least we've put attention on what children and youth are doing around physical activity at a time when, and this is where I would slam myself and all the other academics around, is that we did not stand up and shout from the rooftops in the 1990s about the decline of physical education in our schools, which we should have done. Same for the United States of America. I blame us. We knew all the information back then. Nothing's changed. The things that were killing 45 to 60-year-old men back then, very similar to today. Community, it starts and ends here. This is why you need to invest in this. You need to think about this diagram. Who's responsible for the certain years from birth through to 5 years? Well, parents and the community. As you move forward, parents, community, schools, and clubs. As you move on from that, and this is a very Canadian model, I'm afraid. Community, schools, clubs, and parents as you move into the late teen years, and so you go on, and finally to get into the workforce. You have the physical literacy years, everyone's really active for life, and there's only a small contingent for a very short period of time that are actually in performance sport, if we're honest. Because competing just at the local town level, this isn't really performance, let's be honest. And we're never really honest when it comes to performance sport. And then the workplace. If you're truly interested in your society, how are we keeping people active who have to commute 2 hours to work or whatever it might be, then work 8 hours or 10 hours, and then come home and cook and all those other things? How are we keeping them active? And how much downtime do they really have? How do you design your city to promote physical activity? So, and where do the various agencies, and the reason why I put this in the national sport federations and for us the provincial ones is because at the end of the day, you have to have some accountability. Who's helping drive? Who's supporting each other in doing this? And here, I've got, how many, 7 minutes more? Okay, I want to drive this home because I find everyone makes these systems so complex. They make them very difficult. And really what we're talking about is 3 areas to think about: people, programs, and places. We heard a lot about that from the previous presenters. We heard about environment. The places having a factor. People, certainly, from the coaching to the parents to whoever, to the children themselves, and the programs that are designed. This is why I can take you to places in the world that most North American children would turn their noses up. Oh, I'm not going to swim in that pool. It's, ugh. I'm not going to that gym. It's old. And yet, those facilities have some great people designing great programs. That's why you always invest in people first. Their creativity to design good programs, and you can build the Taj Mahal facilities after that if you want to. But remember, in most instances, you just need an outdoor space, and if you've got some bad weather like rain or snow, just a box with a suitable surface that you bring the toys out, do whatever you need to do with the children, and put the toys away at the end of the day. Gets a bit more sophisticated with swimming pools. But really, we overbuild sport facilities by far. So it's a complex process, and I'm not going to bore you too much. I'm going to finish with a little bit just to drive the messages home. You've seen it all before, I'm certain. So you have 100% as a percentage on the vertical scale. 100% is the adult final state, the first 2 decades of life. Okay? The first line is the neural development curve in humans, aka brain size, brain weight, the hardwiring of the neural system, if you like, the internet of the body. And you'll notice that there is a massive increase in capacity in the first decade to a decade and a half of life. In other words, the brain is growing massively in response to a multitude of different stimuli coming at the brain. And so those stimuli stimulate electrical signals that drive the growth-like factors to develop the sensory capabilities of the brain and the communication system. Very clear? That alone should scream at you why you expose children to as many different stimuli as possible in the first decade and a half of life. Compared to this line, which is the one most people get upset about, this is more to do with the hormonal, the endocrine system, and in this case, the male sex hormone testosterone, present in males and females, but obviously not at the same circulating levels as in the males. This is much more to do with the final onset, if you like, of the pubertal growth spurt and the changes as we come through to the adult state. Happens relatively late. And remember, this particular signaling mechanism is important for things like the onset of the secondary sexual characteristics, hypertrophy, the ability to lay muscle mass down, why you don't need to bother with doing hypertrophy-type training with a bunch of pubescents and prepubescents. You're not going to get a return on investment. Kids are getting stronger by driving the neural program. They're already having overload because they're growing anyway, so they're putting on relative muscle mass, but not in the same way they will eventually as a young adult. Which means that the overall development curve in humans is somewhat sigmoidal. There's a period of rapid development in those first few years of life, a period of relative stability through the middle, and then all hell breaks loose as they go through puberty, until eventually they come out of it. Which means this period of time is a period for exposing youngsters to lots of different things, having the ability to build skill, keeping them absolutely enjoyed in the process, to keep them in the game, to keep them interested, to understand. And remember what the East Germans said, educating the athlete. And I'm using athlete in the broadest sense of the word there. Every child is an athlete. Life is an athletic event. 70 to 80 years on the planet, largely endurance, with a bit of lifting and a few sprints thrown in for fun. That is life. Compared to this, when we get really serious about things, having given the children a chance with a sound base. Now, this is more North American biased, of course. This is change in height in a year. Okay, North American males and females, peak height velocity traditionally at around 12 to 13 years of age, plus or minus a year in North American girls, about 14 to 15 in the North American boys. One thing you need to understand in the generational change across the planet, and at least in the Western civilizations, those with good diets, etc., we have seen an increasing drive younger for things like the onset of puberty. A few years ago, North American girls classically at around 12, 13 years of age. Now they're approaching 11. Boys 14, 15, coming down to around 12 to 13. Not sure exactly why all this is happening, but there are some postulations. So even some of this information that we take for granted is changing over time. which leads to, you see, this period of time is a period when there's relatively stable growth going on. Remember, this isn't saying there's a lack of growth. It's just saying when that flat bit in the middle there, signified by the green, is just that there's relatively continual growth at a sort of set pace compared to the really rapid change before it and afterwards. And remember, this point here, for either kid, either the girls here or the boys here, signifies the end of childhood. Signifies the end of childhood. Now, biologically, the end of childhood signifies massive turmoil coming, which is why you really want to have made sure that you've done a lot of basic exposure to a multitude of movements before that happens. And worse still for our girls, you obviously have less time to do that. So you better have good programs for your girls. Then this one. Changes in aerobic power, aka VO2 max, compared to changes in anaerobic capacity and blood lactate. So you see there's even system changes on the energy science point. So the power aspect's coming much later. But remember, of course, I told you about muscle mass as well changing. You've got big changes occurring in aerobic power. This is without training. This is naturally what's happening. Well, why would aerobic power go up? Well, this is where the big growth has occurred. So a kid's grown up. They've got bigger lungs, bigger blood volume. It's no wonder aerobic capability goes up. That's before you've even trained them. So this is why there's suggestions in the literature as to the type of training that's done and why people use bad phrases like windows of opportunity. Well, actually, the scientific literature doesn't talk about windows of opportunity. It talks about periods of sensitivity. You can change aerobic power all through life if you want to. It modulates. It may be relatively stable as an adult, but you can change things. But there's periods when it's open to great change, often to do with growth and development. The brain itself. We forget about this in the mix of children all the time. I've got 16 seconds left. My God. Okay, there's one video I want to show before I go. So at the top, okay, is the brain looking at the brain from the side. So to the right is the front. If you look at below the black line, the front of the brain is to the top of each slice, right? As the brain goes from the top 5 years of age to about 20, and it goes from the yellows and greens to the indigos, that's signifying the maturation of the brain, and particularly this bit at the front called the prefrontal cortex. This is a very, very late developing, very, very important piece of the brain to do with all sorts of things from decision making to dealing with risk, through to timekeeping, dealing with authority. And you can see where it's happening, and it's no wonder then that our teenagers are kind of a little bit prickly with us adults. It's happening in the brain. And we fight these type of things because although they may look on the outside like miniature adults, inside here they're not yet. They're hardwired that way. And I really want to drive this one home. And then I'm going to leap forward and find my video to finish. Okay, so this is from Melina and Bouchard's work. Melina, as you know, is a very, very well-known author in the area of pediatric physiology. Bouchard is a phenomenal researcher in the area of genetics. Okay, they were to do with the Harvard studies and all that. They looked at a group of boys over a period of close to a decade, and also cross-sectionally. And they chose a task that had nothing to do with skill, because they didn't want the confounding aspect of skill. So they basically had them pull on a steel cable with a tensionometer in it. And they just brought them in every year and asked them to pull and see what the force. They then measured them based on biological maturation, things such as x-rays of skeletal development, etc. So they were able to divide them into early, average, and late maturers. So you know now what you're looking at, right? So you're looking at measuring strength, divided the group into 3 cohorts, early maturers, average maturers, and late maturers. They all get to the same point at the end, and in fact, there's great evidence to show that the trajectory of the later developers surpasses the early developers. Not necessarily true. If you were interested in picking, say, a swim team, and this was an important characteristic, to win at 14, who do you choose? This lot. Meanwhile, you tell this lot that they suck, and they will give up. Okay? Or at 15, or at 16, or at 17. So good for you. If you want to win the World U14 Championships, knock yourself out. If you're interested in winning the Olympics and being good as an adult, and when it really counts, understand what you look at. That would be the one graph I'd showed most parents, because most parents would get that very clearly. Okay, I'm going to leap forward and find you this video. Forget this, forget this. You can have all these slides. Okay. The reason why I want to show this video, because I was enraptured with the previous 3 presentations, because they all talked about environment. So this is a little video about a girl who's now 8 years of age in California. Okay? I want you to listen to the environment that was created by her parents, who were, interestingly enough, quite informed and open-minded, because she, the little girl, asked a question about why is her brother doing skateboarding, he's older, but she's not. Now, if they had taken the sexist view, the boy goes into skateboarding, little girl, you go play with your Barbie doll. But they chose not to. They also, you'll listen to the father talk about trying to be the helicopter parent, the protective parent, about dealing with fear, about this little girl doing something that he was trying to talk her out of because he was scared, not her. If you listen to what is important, the stickers on her skateboard in her bedroom, she also talks about she was scared at first, but you've got to live up to your fears and just do it. That's what the little girl is saying at 7. But these parents had the courage, and you need to create this type of environment in these teaching and coaching places. And that's why you need to really equip your coaches and instructors with the tools to build those relationships and have those conversations. So here is the Pink Helmet Posse.
3, 2, 1, go! We didn't choose the color pink. It just happened. Who's gonna win? Oh, I won. Look at your stuff.
The Pink Helmet Posse is just a movement of girls to skate. It happened because my husband and his 2 friends got together and they all had daughters. When they showed up at the skate park for their skate date, they were all wearing pink helmets. And so they just started getting called the Pink Helmet Posse organically. Bella was 5 years old and her brother was taking skate lessons, and I remember her saying, "Why am I not doing this?" So we put her on a skateboard and she hasn't stopped since.
This is my room. This is my skateboard. It says, have a little fun today. Create your own happiness. Dream big. Follow your heart.
I think California had a big influence on who Bella is and becoming because of the lifestyle that you get to live here. I mean, she surfs and skates every day of her life. I don't even know if she knows how good she has it here.
I started skating when I was about 12, so I was in middle school.
I started skating when I was 5.
Must be nice. It's really good when you're young and you can get involved because it's like you have this big open canvas to kind of do whatever you want. It's a lot like art in that sense of creativity. And so girls like Bella, especially girls who start young, are going to have a real influence not only on people younger than them, but kind of anyone they come in contact with, because it's very inspiring, especially when a younger person's doing it.
I get scared sometimes, but you gotta face your fears and just do it.
One time in particular, she wanted to drop in the deep end of this really big bowl. I tried to talk her out of it. She was gonna do it. So I stood in the bottom like I could actually catch her or something. And she pulled it, and she was fine, and then I'm all, hey, can you do it again so I can get a photo? I do get scared, but she's better than me, so what do I know?
My dream is to have at every skate park a bunch of girls skating. My dream is when I go to my favorite skate park, I'm gonna see more girls than boys. My dream is I wanna be a dolphin trainer.
My hopes and dreams for Bella and for girls like Bella is that they don't hold themselves back from anything. They find something that they're passionate about and something that they love to do because it's really rewarding and it feels really great to love to do something so much. I can't imagine living this lifestyle anywhere else. If you can dream it, you can do it, and California is the place to do it. You know, it's just a really big melting pot of a lot of creativity, and I think Bella is a perfect example of that.
Okay, and on that note, I just want to say thank you very much for your attention. And I really want to leave you with this. As I said, this isn't my job. I'm at a very, very different and very narrow focus. In my job description, I'm measured on 3 things and 3 things only: World Cup, World Championship, and Olympic medals. And yet I'm saying that we need to be invested in all these little children. Thank you.